Знов коридор і холодна підлога, я очі до Бога, а з неба тривога, і червень знов лютий, і рот повен люті, а з греблі катина ж терпець лють, і чомусь людей видно до дна і до сутінок світяться душі роззуті, нехай по горлянку води каламуті, кати ж захлинаються власній отруті. Нас багато за стінами схожих квартирок. Я і ти будем вільні, а бути рослею — це вирок.
Знову тривога нас розбудила, беру я на руки маленького сина. Замотую в ковдру, несу в укриття, щоб зберегти маленьке життя. Знову ракети летять і шахіди, щоб зруйнувати міста України. Щоб убивати мирних людей, вагітних жінок і маленьких дітей.
Вам нас ніколи не зламати, не втопити, не перемогти. Бо в нас найкращі в світі воїни, захисники.
Ти живий?
Повішу я колисочку та й на калиночку, буде вітер колисати мою дитиночку.
Thank you, Larysa Kozyr, for this wonderful short film of music you put together for us today. Ukraine's soul does indeed speak through its music. It was very poignant and moving. Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome. My name is Catherine Cox. I'm an analyst from London and a member of the WJ team. Now, before we start, just a couple of quick notices. Please select your preferred language from the globe icon on your Zoom screen. English speakers, you do need to select the English language channel now to hear the interpretation from Ukrainian. If you cannot see the globe icon, please look for the row of 3 dots and the interpretation should be there. Also, please may I remind everyone of the need to keep this a safe space for everyone. The Q&A will be via the chat only for this webinar. There'll be no raised hand. Please be considerate of the feelings of others when typing in the chat. And if someone does misjudge a comment or a question, please bear with them. Some of our number are very stressed at the moment. All that said, please do post your questions for Renos and Larysa at any time, either in Ukrainian or English. Renos tells me he loves a good Q&A, so please don't hold back and please don't wait till the last minute. And finally, I have a special announcement to make at the end. So, as always, the warmest of welcomes to our Ukrainian colleagues, whether you are in Ukraine or seeking refuge elsewhere in the world. It's been a tough month for you all, with several cities under sustained bombardment and huge numbers of casualties. But Ukraine continues to defend itself with great courage and endurance. We're really glad to see you. Our Ukrainian speaker today, Larysa Kozyr, comes from Donetsk, an area occupied by Russia in violation of Article 2 of the UN Charter. As we gather today, there are an estimated 4 to 6 million Ukrainians living under harsh Russian military rule. Those who have managed to flee have provided accounts of homes being searched repeatedly by armed soldiers, often in the middle of the night, intentionally terrifying children, women, and men of all ages. Those suspected of being sympathetic to Ukraine may be accused of terrorism and be tortured or executed. If Ukrainians refuse to accept a Russian passport, they cannot access health care, welfare payments, or pensions. Their children cannot go to school and they cannot travel. You cannot get a job and you may lose the one that you have. Ukrainians are being urged to change their identities and to Russify their surnames. This is a poster I found urging Russification of names, in this instance from Halushko to Glushkova. The poster says, "Let's cleanse ourselves from imposed Ukrainian Nazism." Gosh, that's a mouthful. I'll say it again. Let's cleanse ourselves from imposed Ukrainian Nazism. Ethnic cleansing as official policy. Children in schools are brainwashed and parents worry in case their child mentions their pro-Ukrainian views at school, which may then lead to the arrest of their parents. Many women who have escaped report being raped. Significant incentives are offered to collaborators. Properties and possessions are seized and given to Russians. This is the life of occupation that our Ukrainian colleagues and their fellow countryfolk are trying to defend against. This is the life in the territories that the children, spouses, and friends of some of our colleagues are trying to liberate, as we saw in one of the film clips there. As well as fighting for their land, our colleagues are fighting for their identity and their culture, their music, and their soul. We stand in solidarity with you here today. In these incredibly difficult times, we also welcome any Palestinian and Israeli colleagues. The world continues to watch in horror at the unspeakable suffering of the civilian populations in that part of the world and at the atrocities being committed. We feel for all colleagues in such terrifying and distressing situations. We welcome all those who live in fear of erasure, wherever you are in the world. And as always, we welcome all those who come to support our colleagues, including, of course, our speakers. Thank you for being here, for offering your support, and for making a difference to how our colleagues survive these horrific times. And now it gives me great pleasure to welcome Karin Fleischer from Argentina, who is our guest chair today. Karin caught our eye for her work with those affected by state terrorism in Argentina. She sits on the board of the Latin American Committee for Analytical Psychology, whose chair, Eduardo Cavallo, is here with us today. Welcome, Eduardo. As well as being an analyst, Karin is a university professor in analytical psychology and has published on many topics. What I didn't know is that she introduced the embodied active imagination, authentic movement into several Latin American countries. Thank you for being with us today, Karin, and welcome.
Well, many thanks, Catherine, for the introduction, and also I feel very touched for your words and also for Larysa's video. And still the images and the sounds are with me. And also I wanted to thank you for holding all these series of webinars together for such a long time. I know the tremendous work you are doing. I have been witnessing that. And again, I want to welcome all the participants who are here tonight for this webinar and for holding all this together. And to begin, I wanted to remind us that almost a year and 9 months has already passed since the beginning of the invasion from Russia to Ukraine, and the war is still going on and getting even worse. And now, as Catherine just said, new forms of violence are taking place in the Middle East. So when these kind of violence and events are take such a long time, I think that feelings of powerlessness and impotency may begin to emerge. And I believe that it's important to have strong containers where to hold those feelings, as I think this series of webinars are contributing to that. So before introducing today's webinar and introducing the speakers, we will now have the 1 minute silence. And I think it's an important moment to make space and to hold together the feelings, the sorrow, the grief, the pain, any feeling you may be carrying at this moment. And for that, I wanted to invite you to imagine or to call for the support of your ancestors or whoever you want to call for, as or the communion of saints, as Non Fundum Lisa had very beautifully expressed during the last webinar. So we are back. Very soon then, we will have the opportunity to listen to Renos Papadapoulos and to Larysa Kozyr. And as Catherine said, that will be followed by Q&A. And it's really an honor for me to be introducing their presentations. And I just wanted to make a very brief introduction and share my experience coming from a Latin American country, Argentina, where we also had experienced the fear and the threat of terror during the last dictatorship that took place in my country during 1976 and 1983. During those years, thousands of people were taken to concentration camps and later were disappeared by the state terrorism. Among those people, many were women. The women were taken sometimes with their small children. Many women also were pregnant, and they gave birth while being kidnapped. Soon after that, these children were taken away from their mothers and given to military families who raised them as their own, changing their names and identity. That also has been like stolen from their true identities. In some cases, they have been raised by the same militaries who had killed their parents. One of these children, after recovering her true name and identity, asked, "How can it be said that we were raised with love? What place can love have in a crime against humanity?" While these acts of extreme cruelty were happening, also a group of women began to gather around the monument of Plaza de Mayo. Each Thursday, they will walk in circle, talking to one another about their search for their sons and daughters who were disappeared. They became known to the world as the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. In their struggle to recover the children who had been kidnapped by the militaries, they had made space for a true act of love. Today they are very old, some had already died, and some are more than 19 years old, but they keep walking every year to hold the memory. Since the beginning of their working together, 133 children have recovered their true identity from more than 400 who were kidnapped. They never looked for revenge, and they looked for justice. Julio Cortázar, who was an Argentinian writer, wrote of them in 1982. When at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday in April 1977, 14 women between the ages of 40 and 60, mothers of the disappeared, defied the ban on the right of assembly enacted by the all-powerful military junta and demonstrated in the Plaza de Mayo their pain and their refusal to be dismissed without any response from the court in the ministry, the generals lost their first battle. In the face of the continuous acts of severe adversity that our colleagues from Ukraine and now also from Israel and Palestine are going through, I wanted to share the testimony of this woman, not only as a symbol, but also as a real-life example of hope and also as the capacity to transform despair, pain, and deep losses into courage, new possibilities, and new life. Also for me is an example of the need that we have for collective containers to hold the wounds in these collective situations. When the pain is so great and the acts of terror are so unspeakable, as Renos Papadapoulos, our next speaker today, said, sharing our humanity may be the only viable antidote. So now it's a pleasure for me to introduce our two speakers for this webinar. First, Renos K. Papadopoulos. He has a really great background, so I will just have to make it a bit shorter, just to make it on time. And he's a PhD professor at the University of Essex in UK, founder and director of the Center for Trauma, Asylum and Refugees, and also is director of the MA and PhD in Refugee Care. He has been consulted by the United Nations and other organizations because of his work with refugee people, tortured persons, trafficked people, and other survivors, political violence, and disasters in many countries. He lectures and offers specialist training internationally, and his writings have appeared in 18 languages. There are much more, no? But his last book involuntary dislocation, home, trauma, resilience, and adversity activated development was translated and published in Ukrainian in 2023. He's a very, very demanded man at this moment. So it's really an honor for us to have Renos here today. And now I will introduce also Larysa Kozyr, who is from Ukraine, and she is the responsible of the very beautiful video and very touching video we have seen at the beginning. And Larysa is an analytical psychologist with a psychoanalytic and analytical psychology degree. And until 2014, she lived in Donetsk, but in 2014, due to the invasion of Russian troops in eastern Ukraine, she had to move with her family to Kiev, where now she lives and works since the full-scale invasion. Her parents and brothers still live in the temporarily occupied Donetsk, and Larysa is married with 2 teenage sons and works with adults and children, and is in the process of planning her participation in the next year's Router program at the Ukrainian Jungian Association. It was really a pleasure to work with both of you in the preparation of this webinar. So welcome, Larysa, and now I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, good afternoon, dear colleagues and guests of the webinar. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity for Ukrainian analysts to share their own stories of work and life during this terrible war. Those who do not remember their past are not worthy of their future, wrote Ukrainian writer Maxim Rylsky. In Ukraine, since 2014, the war with Russia is ongoing, but I would like to focus on events of 1937. You will see the slides during the presentation, and they present artists of the executed Renaissance. So exactly 86 years ago, the largest mass execution of Ukrainian intelligentsia took place in the Karelian village of Sandarmoh in the USSR. From 27th of October till November the 4th, 1,111 people were shot, including 287 Ukrainians. In those few days, they shot the most prominent Ukrainian writers, playwrights, scientists, philosophers, scholars of the time. That's Mykola Azarov, Mykola Kulish, Les Kurbas, Serhiy Hrushevsky, Valerian Podmogilny, and others. All those who were supposed to become the driving force behind Ukraine's development as an advanced, modern European state. But they didn't, because artworks, archives, any references to these or other representatives of the Ukrainian executed Renaissance were destroyed. Those were artists of the Soviet Ukraine in the 20s and 30s of the 20th century. During the period of Stalin's terror, from 1933 until 1985, when the prominent Ukrainian poet Vasyl Stus died in a Russian prison already under Gorbachev, the Russian totalitarian regime brutally persecuted the right of Ukrainians to their own identity, statehood, and culture. Throughout the current war with Russia, especially in 2022-23, well-known Ukrainian poets Gleb Babich, Artem Dovgopolyi, writers Volodymyr Vakulenko, tortured to death by Russians, Victoria Amelina, who died from a missile attack. Other writers, historians, archaeologists, musicians, ballet dancers, singers, architects, directors, theater actors were killed and were destroyed by Russians. This war is brutal, full of huge losses for Ukraine. At the same time, we see an incredible interest of Ukrainians to their own history, literature, and art. Ukrainian art writers And Ukrainian music are now becoming world famous, not only because of the war with Russia, but also because of the rethinking of their own history. Whereas the question, what is interesting about us as a nation, apart from the fact that we've been brutally persecuted and killed by Russians for over 300 years? Who are we, Ukrainians? Healing the collective history of an entire nation helps every Ukrainian to gain the right to heal their family and individual history, and the other way around. The question of looking for one's own identity and individuation is becoming an urgent one for every Ukrainian. It is for these answers that people can turn to analytical psychology and psychotherapy. For Ukrainians, the therapy room is becoming a place not only for questions or answers, but also for telling or creating stories. The individual story of each person who comes to the office, it's intertwining with the history of the whole nation at times of difficulties. Individual consciousness meets collective consciousness in a concrete way. The notion of identity is inextricably linked to the notion of home and the connection of a person with the generations before and after. I would like to share some of my individual experience. Me and many of my clients finally switched to the Ukrainian language in the spring of 2022. The clients did that for their own free will. Two of those who were abroad specifically asked me to speak Ukrainian to feel connected to home, to be alive. In times of strong emotions and aggressive states, some clients switch to Russian, but then go back to Ukrainian. However, I notice how qualitatively new associations emerge from the change of language when they switch to Ukrainian. Many recall stories of their grandparents who spoke Ukrainian, fairy tale sayings, and especially Ukrainian songs and lullabies.
When I moved to Donetsk, which has been occupied by Russian Federation. Before that, I worked there in Donetsk, and I worked here as well before and after the full-scale invasion. For all this time, I was asking myself questions. Was my mental condition capable of being a safe place for my clients' difficulties, negative experiences, and projections of my clients? To what extent was it possible for me to maintain the ability to think analytically under constant shelling and threats? Was it possible to call it psychotherapy when clients contacted me from their own cars, bathrooms, hiding places, storage rooms where they had to hide during bombing, and there was no light, we were only by the candlelight? I remember a young woman, a volunteer who was the last to arrive late to my office. There was no heating or electricity. We met by candlelight, and she used to say, "It is so cozy and calm here. I can see your face a little bit in this light, and it's enough for me." Clients constantly lacked words and symbols to describe the horrific reality and their own experiences. Sessions were filled with horrible events or news. Foreign clients who had not lived in Ukraine for several years did not allow themselves to talk about their personal concerns for some time. Any experiences that were not related to the military events in Ukraine were devaluated and rejected by them. The survivors' guilt blocked their opportunity to talk about their personal experiences. The collective experience of pain and suffering captured and nullified the individual. The individual dissolved in a powerful wave of the collective. In the first months of the full-scale war, many of my clients were engaged in volunteering activities without feeling tired, devaluing their own individual needs. Some clients stopped having dreams, or their dreams became terrifying nightmares, so they couldn't remember them. When they returned to our regular meetings, the dreams returned as well. Many people had dreams of disasters, nuclear explosions, or tsunamis before the war, as well as late in the end of 2022.
Later, when our sessions came back and the setting was restored, little by little, my clients returned to their usual topics, relevant and personal. They were speaking about their dreams and fantasies. It was possible to pay more attention to transference and countertransference. Clients gradually allowed themselves to rely more on the therapeutic space and to deploy transference process. But to what extent the transference was archetypical? How did they see me? I stayed in Kiev all the time. An important question for my clients was why was I staying there? The client, a young woman who had lived abroad for several years, was extremely worried about her family in Ukraine. In March 2022, she started asking me whether I was mentally healthy, if I had suffered from panic attacks or anxiety attacks. Because if I work under rockets, under shelling, I might affect her with my own anxiety or somehow harm her. She projected a hostile and aggressive part of herself onto me. It was unbearable for her to worry about me, her therapist. She could not convince her parents and grandmother to leave, so she was angry with me. She was angry and guilty because she was powerless to help her family to be a good daughter. She believed that there was no any rational reason to stay in Ukraine, and therefore she perceived my decision to stay as forced victim of the circumstances. She was asking, why should I think about someone who stayed in Kiev? It would be so much better if I had no one there. Then I would have the right not to read the news, not to worry about you. She was saying that. Inside me, I also asked myself the same question. Who did she see me as? Who was I becoming for my client? An enemy, a victim, an evil stepmother? Another client who was on holiday abroad with her little twin children and husband at the end of February 22 remained there. She was full of guilt that she had to stay in the safe country. She wanted to come back to Ukraine to help others, and she was ready to leave her children with her husband for that. It was crucial to her to see that I'm staying in Ukraine. She could see me as someone who did the correct, the good thing. It helped her to maintain this connection with Ukrainian people and with those sufferings. This young woman couldn't allow herself to enjoy her safety while her country was literally drowning in pain and blood. So she could see me as a hero who serves for the benefit of others. And she too saw me as someone who stays due to circumstances, not to my own decision. Another client, a student who stayed abroad, she saw me as the motherland monument, a metal huge statue, unreachable to the enemy, able to protect everyone. But I was unreachable to deep feelings of my client, because she couldn't feel scared next to me. She couldn't share her vulnerabilities about her life because I wasn't tired, because I wasn't afraid, because I stayed in Kiev to work. Another client who lived at once, she suggested me her help. She wanted to help me to find social living. She offered me to buy me groceries, to find power banks for me, and clothing. To some people, I looked and I seemed to be a victim who couldn't leave due to some reasons. Who was I to them? A hero or a victim? In both of these situations, I wasn't the one who decided what to do on my own. And once I was talking to my client, a teenager, and our children clients, they are the best teachers. So I was talking to him, his parents took him abroad, and he was extremely homesick. He was missing his friends, and he didn't want to set up new contacts in his new country. So he asked me, if I remain here, In the place where no one wants me, whom will I be? Will I be a monster or a victim? There were only these two options, because to his mind, all heroes remained in Ukraine. But what was this heroism? The regular Ukrainians who remained to live, to fight, to stay in their country. To be a victim means to give up everything and die. But what is the price that Ukrainians are paying? What sacrifices everyone makes? Are they becoming monsters towards themselves in regards of their choices, of their individuality, of their own life? What sacrifice make heroes? They sacrifice their life, their simple joys, their feeling of home and safety. Simple actions of everyday life, creativity, stories that could be brought back home, stories that could become a part of a bigger life. So I'm recalling the phrases of or the quotes of my clients from the last year. Some of them mentioned that I can't even afford myself to take coffee with a piece of cake without thinking that I'd better donate this money. I can't enjoy a vacation. I can't enjoy a weekend day. One client is telling me, I'm completely pissed off with my children who are laughing and enjoying themselves, while in Ukraine, children are left without their parents. Some people were mentioning that they don't want to buy new books, new clothing, because it has no sense in it. I can't allow myself to dance. I love dancing, but I can't do it because we have war. Or I could hear that I cry all the time. I don't know if I'll be able to laugh ever again. Gradually, during the sessions, we began discussing with the clients about the importance of talking about ordinary desires and fears, despairs, and hope at the same time. We talked about the individual aspirations for life, love, and relationships have value. They lead to light and are the only way to resist the enemy and darkness. Clients are gradually regaining the ability to fill the analytical space with images and symbols of the unconscious, with fantasies, dreams, because they feel that this space is a place to create their own stories, both mundane and heroic. Stories that will be woven into the delicate lace of the history of the whole country and the world. But both the therapist and the client have to be vigilant, because around every corner there is the shadow of despair and guilt for the loss and the most precious things, their own home and their own history. And the price they demand is very high, those shades. These are the sacrifices that have to be made every day life to receive the gift of the right to live, to work, to love, and to live an ordinary human life in one's own home. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and let me read to you a story. It is an imagined story, but I think it would convey a lot of feelings that any Ukrainian or anyone who lived through similar experience would recognize. It is called "Where is Your Home, Girl?" The bus picked up high speed on the road, but gently cradled the passengers inside its metal body. It was getting hotter. The cabin was filled with children and women. The driver turned on the heater up to full blast. Lesia was sweating and pressed her face against the cold window glass. Her fine light brown hair was quickly getting wet, but it also dried quickly. It was always tied back in a small ponytail, convenient for constant traveling. Her age still allowed Lesia to do without makeup, but she didn't have enough time for it. But after 3 or 5 years, the wrinkles around her eyes or on her forehead could no longer be hidden. but she always had black eyelashes and steep eyes. This is how her grandmother called them. Since childhood, it was difficult to name their color, from yellow like rye to dark tea or to color of young wheat. They changed throughout the day, just like the girl's mood. Girl who ran the wind on the steep throughout the village, grandmother's steep eyes. A minute's sleep was interrupted by a message and telegram, a voice message from her husband. Larysa hated them. Is it so hard to write? Hastily, exhaling cigarette smoke, the man spoke. Hello, I've been calling you, but the subscriber is unavailable, so you are on the road. I'll throw some money on your card and can buy something for the kids for the autumn. I'll be back by November. So pass my regards to them. I'll be in Kiev very soon and I'll call you, kiss you, bye. It always easier to him to make promises in the messages than in a phone conversation. In their relationship, promises became commonplace and meetings became fewer and more far. They have lost each other a long time ago, as well as each other had lost themselves. Larysa looked out of the window again. Colorful fields with meadows and trees, houses, big and small fences, the sturdy power lines were passing by. Her eyes were sticking together. Rainbow little houses, a bright fairy tale, someone else's life, predictable, constant, and therefore unrealistic and distant. It was strange, houses of different colors should be on the way from Poland to Ukraine, not vice versa. She must have imagined it. It started to drizzle, and the picture outside the window gradually melted into the haze. Larysa was flipping through the Google Calendar, trying to choose dates for her trip to Germany. Her director had been waiting for this date to be confirmed yesterday. She needed to write articles, only 2 or so. 6 months ago, Larysa agreed to create Contact for Children's website of a friend who had lost their previous business for free. The whole project was almost a volunteer effort. It was as if she was helping to do what she loved, inventing fairy tales, drawing small illustrations for them, answering comments, but she had to do it all at night or weekend or on the road. Since childhood, she created a fairy tale world in her imagination. She used to draw tree houses. She won school competitions in the first grade. It was after her parents took her away from a small village to Kiev, after her grandmother's big house among endless meadows, to a 2-room small apartment on the 3rd floor in Darnitsa district. Back in the village, there was a real tree house that her cousin had built near the house. Her brother was killed in July, back in 2014 near Horlivka city. The same year, the century-old apple tree burned out by lightning and fell apart along with the house on it. Just like her dream of becoming an artist, Larysa became a lawyer. Larysa's mother took her mother to live with her in Lviv. For 2 years she was treated for her heart, bronchitis and lungs, until last summer when her grandmother said she would return to live out her days in the village as soon as the Russians withdrew. She returned and uncovered the native land heals, not these floors of yours. She repeated, painting a huge vegetable garden again. All the time grandmother was calling Larysa Asa for cherries, or for the first cucumbers, then for raspberries, red and yellow raspberries. She didn't pick them up. She kept them on the bushes, waiting for her grandmother, but Larysa didn't have time to come. Larysa opened Word document. There was only 2 articles written. She opened her laptop, but behind there was a woman that couldn't stop talking, a big woman who was repacking things from her backpack into her bag and repeating, "Yes, I'll make it to another town. I'll carry less than." Larysa smiled. "Strange people. What is that town? It is in Poland?" And we hadn't even crossed the border yet. Woman dropped something on the laptop. Lisa jumped up. Watch out. Where are you going in such a hurry? This Polish city will be tomorrow when we arrive in Poland. We've just left home. It depends on where your home is. We're going to Ukraine. Lisa was about to argue with the woman, but she heard a voice to her left. We left Poland. We're going home to Ukraine. And where is your home, girl? A small old woman asked. Lesia couldn't answer. She had not known this answer for a long time. She lived and worked in Kiev. Every month she traveled to Poland on firm business and also helped Ukrainian families in Krakow and Warsaw. She provided legal assistance. Sometimes in the centers for displaced persons, she played, she drew with other children. She made up stories for these children. It was pity that it was with other people's children, because her own son and daughter were with her mother in Lviv. It was safer that way. Until they went to school. Twice a month, she went to visit them for the weekend, to sleep and to be together. Girl, where is your home? The old woman repeated. The young woman didn't know what to say and flinched. Someone was calling on Viber. Lesia looked at it. It was from work. They had already written several times, asking for the date of her business trip to Germany. She dropped the cell. She sat for 3 minutes looking at the screen. She opened the last message she had typed on her phone. She pressed the button. Her mother's sleepy voice answered. Lesia, hi, what's wrong? Forgot something? Is everything all right? Mom, hi, I'm sorry I'm late. Gather the kids for a couple of dates. I'll pick them up. You've just left. Where are you going, to Kiev? I'm coming back to my home, to my grandmother. I'm coming back home, Mom. That's it. This is the end of the story. I'm passing the floor to Renos.
Thank you, Larysa. Thank you, everybody. It's so moving. It's difficult to move on to the next presentation, but we need to move on. But before that, I also need to thank everybody for inviting me, for organizing these amazing events, for creating this space, and for Larysa's presentation, and for Karen's chairing, and all the organizers. So let me start, because we don't have very much time. So I am going to start with my presentation, which is about collective forms of severe adversity, which is important for us to find a word, a way to refer to what these events are about. Because if we talk about them as trauma events, then there is a kind of a untidy tautology. We say that a traumatic event is what creates a trauma, and a trauma is what is created by a traumatic event. And then, any kind of student of logic or philosophy would laugh at us, because that's not a definition. So I'm referring to the collective forms of severe adversity, referring to mainly acute but also chronic catastrophic disruptions to what is familiar, predictable, and comprehensible. To what is familiar, predictable, and comprehensible. These three things constitute the texture of our daily life. Things are familiar in some way, predictable, and comprehensible. Of course, learning is about when this is not totally watertight and something unfamiliar, we learn it and we develop. Something unpredictable, we learn and we develop. The same with the comprehensible. But if it's too much, if this a catastrophic disruption, then that is an adversity. And when it affects larger segments of population, I refer to that as collective, of course. So I don't understand, I got something on my screen. I don't know from where it came. And for example, these are, social strife, wars, natural or human-made disasters, etc. What are the effects of these? Of course, we have the list of expected effects that all of us understand. These are the destruction of life and property, disruption of forms of social functioning, disruption of geographical, physical, and social ecology. And at the human level, we're talking about losses, suffering, trauma, loss of agency. More or less, we know these things, and we sort of expect that this will happen when we are facing or when we're exposed to collective forms of severe adversity. There is another group of effects that are less noticeable, and these are various forms of disruptions of society and human relationships, such as moral injury. The idea is that not only our body can be injured, not only our psyche, but also our sense of morality can be injured, and our sense of humanity can be injured, etc. So these are less expected effects. I would argue that the most dangerous ones are the ones that are unexpected, or even less expected than the less expected. And these are the far-reaching implications of all the above, because all the above have a degree of expected effects, but also can have far-reaching implications. But also, what I would like to introduce today and share with you is another two groups of unexpected effects of these severe forms of collective adversity, and that is what I would call epistemological effects. In other words, how do we form our own thinking of what we think we know? How do we see things? How do we understand things? How do we form our understanding? And also, what I would call the archetypal effects. All of us know about archetypes. What are the actual archetypal effects when we are exposed to these types of adversities? Now, all of us are exposed to images of this type of destruction daily or very frequently by the media. And these are in different types of world, different places in the world, from different tsunamis or other destructions, and different wars. And we sort of get used to this kind of destruction, which is basically destroying the predictable, the familiar, and the comprehensible. It's beyond comprehension what these things are about. And in effect, what I'm trying to say is that the nature of these events is impacting on everybody, not only the people who have lost loved ones, etc., but everybody, not also those people who try to help them, but also all of us who are either commenting or bystanders or whatever. Let me try to explain to you. It's almost like, I like this kind of pictorial things. It's almost like a big dark cloud descending over us. And because of the enormity of the suffering, the losses, the destructiveness, the whole experience is just overwhelming, overpowering, flooding us with disorientation, unfamiliarity, complexity. So this is the difficulty. What happens when this big dark cloud descends on us? More specifically, it's important to identify that we're talking about three groups of factors here. And I would call them either, I would call them concrete damage, overwhelming concrete damage, emotionally charged phenomena, experiences and events, and pressing needs. This is a lethal cocktail of these three together. When that overwhelms us and overpowers us, we find it very difficult to think about, to consider anything. But we are lost, basically. But nevertheless, as human beings, we have an unrelenting need to understand. On the one hand, we're lost. On the other hand, we need to understand. And the understanding that we develop tends to be oversimplified, polarized, and lacking complexity. It tends to be oversimplified, polarized, and lacking complexity. So this is what I would argue is one of the most important epistemological effects when we are exposed to this situation. Now, I know that all psychotherapies have their own terminology in explaining that, but this is just a simple language to try to understand what is happening. And when there is this polarization, we know that things are just every single aspect of our perception tends to become polarized. We're the good and they're the bad. These people are traumatized and others are resilient, as if there is no resilience in people who are traumatized. These kind of sharp polarizations. Sorry, I'm putting the... Then the field itself is divided. Some refer to this field as trauma-informed, and others refer to it as strengths-based. Then, then we either see ourselves as victims or as heroes. And I think Larysa has beautifully explained, demonstrated how this works. Either victims of heroes, and ultimately it comes to our own ability to deal with these situations. And we say we can do absolutely nothing. We're totally impotent. You can't deal with the enormity of this situation, or we're omnipotent. We can change everything. So it affects even us, the way we look at ourselves and deal with it. Therefore, what I'm saying really is that one casualty, what we lose when we are exposed to these collective forms of severe adversity, for everybody, not only for the people who lost loved ones, etc., but for everybody, what we lose is complexity, the capacity for complexity. And I repeat again, because this is really quite important, this is the lethal cocktail of these three aspects: the concreteness and widespread damage and losses. It's there, it's real, concrete. The emotionally charged phenomena, these phenomena are highly emotionally charged. There are the pressing needs, very urgent things. Come on, we need to do something urgently. We can't sit around. That is a lethal cocktail that paralyzes us. Not necessarily that we're aware of that. We may be manically involved in action, but in effect, what we lose is our capacity to process events and experiences. That capacity becomes diminished. And this is really very, very important, because we don't think about that. We're thinking only of the visible and predictable losses. In that sort of situation, we tend to not to have space to think, to reflect. We tend to think impulsively. And I call it epistemological acting out. We act out epistemologically, trying to concoct some kind of formulations that allegedly give us clear understanding, and going back again to oversimplification and polarization. In effect, we distort reality. And if we distort reality, what chances do we have to have effective planning and acting? because already we have distorted reality. So I remind you of the previous slide that we talked about the epistemological effects. Now let's look at the archetypal effects. Trying to put it again pictorially to understand what we're talking about. I can agree with somebody, or I can approve, or I can praise. The moment I idealize somebody, then it reaches an archetypal polarity, and I'm no longer in control. The same in terms of the negative. I can disagree with somebody, I can disapprove or I condemn, but the moment I demonize somebody, I am not in control. I don't demonize, I don't only dehumanize the other person, but I dehumanize myself. This is what we forget. The moment we demonize somebody or I over-idealize somebody, we lose connection with ourselves. Here is in Ukrainian, the archetypal polarization. Therefore, the closer we are to this, to the borders of what we can control, the less connection we have with ourselves. Here it is. So in a sense, this is the kind of safer area where we can actually have some awareness of ourselves. Once we get into the outer perimeter, we lose connection with ourselves, and we're controlled by the archetypal various scenario. We play roles of heroes, or see other people either as heroes or as victims, etc., etc., etc. So I have connection with myself once when I can see the good and bad in relation to the concreteness of my reality. But once I connected with this other wider strata, then the connection I have is very tenuous. And I'm talking about this in terms of a kind of a reverse relationship. The closer I'm to a personal conflict, it's more difficult to bear. So there is some kind of benefit to moving to an archetypal level, because it's very difficult to deal with my own personal conflict. So the closer I am to the personal conflict, the more difficult it is for me to bear, but I also have more agency and control. But once I go more into the archetypal polarities, it is easier to bear, but actually I have less personal agency and control. And this reverse relationship is something that we often, I mean, we know intuitively, but we don't really value, because we should be really aware of the stratosphere of the archetypal realities around us, that if we get further away from our own inner and personal conflict, and we put it into the other wider conflict, then we are exposed to what I call as archetypal radiation, like you're going out in this space, you know, and that is another concrete way of our diminished capacity to process. That is another way that is expressed. And what are the characteristics of this archetypal radiation? Well, a lot of contradictory things. On the one hand, we have an archetypal abstraction and generalization, and we are saying this is the conflict between good and evil, complete abstraction, nothing about concrete things of who does what, but sort of, you know, putting in that kind of general abstract abstraction. And then also archetypal personification, that this person is the incarnation of good or the incarnation of evil. The moment we go into that, we have no control. We are controlled by the archetype. Of course, we know about the luminosity and the irresistible fascination that archetypes have. There is an intoxicating relief from relinquishing our conflict of the personal, because there is some kind of sense of liberation when we are sliding into the archetypal orbit, but with a lot of cost, at a great cost. And there is a lethal exposure to the seduction of the Luciferian light. I will come back to that. There is a lethal exposure to the seductiveness of the Luciferian light. In other words, of destructiveness. Destructiveness does have an attraction. And then ultimately we become puppets of an archetypal scenario. And we just play things and we think that it's ourselves and we're serving causes and all of that. But actually, as Jung would say, we are collective people at that time. We're no longer connected. We're very tenuously connected with ourselves. This is the archetypal epistemology, trying to understand that when we move into these sort of situations, our knowledge and what we consider as our understanding are very, very limited, severely limited. And they are dictated by the archetypal pressures around us. I'm very impressed that the World Council of Churches came up with these three things that we should never forget. Sweetly, we forget it because it's too disturbing. But it says that violence repels us, but violence also attracts us. Look at the films all the time. They are called action. What is action? Violence. But we don't call it action. We don't call it violence. We don't call it killing. We call it action. What is action? Designer violence. You know, how to kill people and destroy things in a stylish, in a chic way. And we're attracted by that. Violence alarms us, but violence also entertains us. That's another aspect of this seductive. Violence destroys us, but violence also protects us. Very frightening. We're all against violence, but we love violence because also it protects us. Just yesterday, I was looking at the BBC website, and apparently there is a new long film by Ridley Scott on Napoleon. And one of the commentators on BBC was just writing this. Just read what she's saying. As the cannonballs, she's talking about some of the, how wonderful this film is. Apparently it's nearly 2.5 hours film. It's just, it's coming out now. As the cannonballs, he's talking about some scene from the film. As the cannonballs hurtle into the eyes, bloodied soldiers and horses are sucked into the freezing waters. You can imagine that. Desperately trying to escape. It's dramatic, it's terrifying, and it's also very beautiful. This horrific attraction to destructiveness. And this is what I talk about Luciferian attraction, Luciferian light. There are typical archetypal narratives, scenario in this sort of situation. We mentioned already, we all know the victim, savior, or rescuer, or persecutor, or perpetrator, or aggressor. We know this. We know the victim and the hero, but there are many more. There is about, archetypal narratives. All of these are polarized, of course. Self-sacrifice or survival. Very painful, very, very painful. Hinted at very strongly by what Larysa was telling us. Loyalty, betrayal, very powerful, very frightening archetype. Forgotten, abandoned, loved and supported by all. There are many, many. This is just to give you an example of many archetypal narratives that drive us in this sort of situation. Our task is to humanize the archetype. I've introduced this expression. We need to tame the archetype. We need to connect it. We need to imbue it with the specificities of human dimensions. We need to ground it onto the actual lived realities of you and me. Otherwise, it's going to destroy us. And one way of doing it in the trainings that I offer, I call it as CUT, complexity, uniqueness, and totality. In other words, we should never forget that when we're talking about complexity, is not only personal and collective, but with the various relevant contexts. Yes, a socio-political context is relevant, an economic is relevant, this and that. Can we realize and the complexity of these situations, and not to reduce it everything in terms of, well, he's the archetype of evil and nothing else. It's not like that. There are geopolitical, ideological, intrapsychic, interpersonal, socio-political discourses. We need to hold on to the complexity of these situations and not reduce them into oversimplified situations. To avoid confusion, not to psychologize the political and too quickly sort of find psychological recipes. And the uniqueness and totality, uniqueness of the situation and totality in terms of all the relevant parts and strengths and weaknesses. There is a need to humanize the archetype. And this is what we see from people actually who have been in war, and then they have the compulsion, they have the strong impulse to go back and meet the other human beings who were also caught up in that war and try to be more human together. And that goes back to the American Civil War, that there are still, after all these years, get together Southerns and Northerns trying to sort of say what has happened to us. German and British and English come together to see what have we done, and trying to see, come into the center. Remember the diagram that I've given you, come to the center to see the specificity that this man that he was my enemy yesterday, his name is Gert, whatever it is, and he has 3 children and I have 2 children, and they can humanize that connection. There is such a powerful need for that. The Americans and Japanese after the Second World War, where they in the Pacific, that they were killing each other, that incredible atrocities happen. They have the need to go back and humanize each other. Here is a German soldier. I don't know, British people know Gert Trautmann, who started with the Nazi youth and was a prisoner of war in England. And he was a goalkeeper for Manchester United. He's a legend. To begin with, he was just the Nazi, and later he just became one of us. He had an Iron Cross as a German soldier, and he got the Order of the British Empire also. Some people managed to bridge this gap. It's important to develop an understanding that there are different types of victims. In language, in everyday language, we say that a person is a victim of the war, a victim of tsunami, a victim of this. That is fine. It is the inevitable outcome of being exposed to the adverse and devastating events and circumstances. And then we say they are victims of that situation, of those events. But developing a victim identity is something different, and we should be very, very careful about that, because that develops a passivity, a lack of responsibility, inappropriate dependence, and an entitlement. It actually disempowers the very person that we want to help, and it develops what we call learned helplessness. So we need to be very careful about that when we're helping the victims, not to victimize them further by strengthening their victim identity. And this is what I would call secondary victimization, when we inadvertently install and strengthen the victim identity in those people that we want to help, by saying, help them because they are traumatized. They are traumatized, please help them. No, help them because they are human beings, regardless whether they are traumatized or not. The moment you appeal to pity, you are keeping deeper those people into the victim role. That's why over the years I developed the adversity grid, and in order to restore the level of complexity, So for us to remember that, yes, there are negative effects in working with these people, and when we're exposed to severe forms of collective adversity, but also every human being has unchanged parts, negative and positive, and also has some positive effects. And this not only at the individual level, but also at the family level and wider society. And it's important to keep in mind this complexity and not zoom only into their problems and nothing else, because then we inadvertently keep them deeper into the victim role, and we strengthen their victim identity. And even within the negative, it's important to make a distinction. What did we say that the epistemological effect is? Oversimplification and polarization. We need to introduce further differentiation. Even within the negative, there is a huge difference between psychiatric disorders and human suffering. There is a huge distinction. And we need to make these distinctions, not to sort of say everybody is traumatized, whatever that word means. We use the word trauma for some discomfort as well as for a psychiatric disorder like PTSD. We need to make differentiations. Otherwise, for individuals, we actually keep them deeper into the victim role. I'm not going to waste time on this now because I'm aware of the time. That's why it's important to make a huge distinction between distress and disorder. Distress is the normal response to abnormal circumstances. Not all suffering needs to be stopped and distress. Disorder is the abnormal response to abnormal circumstances beyond the appropriate time and context and circumstances. And we have Jung, who keeps reminding that suffering is not an illness. Suffering is not an illness. Suffering is not an illness. We're not there to stop the suffering of people. We're there to help them develop some meaning, to see its teleological function, not to stop it. All the industry of trauma is to stop their trauma, to stop their traumatize. They're human beings. It's appropriate that they are experiencing a degree of distress and a degree of suffering. It would be abnormal if they did not. So we're there to help them along that journey, not to stop their trauma, please. That's why I say adversity survivors are philosophers in a sense, because if we do not only focus on stopping their trauma and we try to connect with their totality, they will be asking existential questions, because being exposed to these incredibly powerful situations, these powerful situations are substantially transformative for the negative, but also for the positive. There are situations that we refer to as people lose or find God in these sort of situations. And they ask existential questions like, why me? Why me? That's a question that we are asked all the time. Why me has no answer. But it's an opportunity to enter into exploration in order to develop our own human dignity and not see ourselves just simply as animals who are killed and nothing else. people are asking about the nature of life and death, of good and evil, of human nature, of purpose in life. People are saying that all of a sudden, because I came so close to death, I've become so grown up. These are opportunities for radical readjustment and transformation of people's perspectives on life. That's why I'm saying that this work, in effect, involves us learning two languages, two approaches. One is to repair a damage. Yes, people are traumatized and we need to respond. We cannot stop it. Come on, you know. I mean, we need to share and find ways, and this is our capacity as therapists, not to import techniques, but connect with the pain of that human being in front of us so that they can feel that there is some human warmth and humanizing that incredible assault, not only from the enemy and from the losses, but also from these archetypal invasions. And we can only humanize the archetype with an individual connection with the person in front of us or with a group of people that we're working with. So yes, there is something about how to repair their damage as much as we can. And that is easily comprehensible because it's the medical model. You know, if it's the model of the car mechanic. You know, if your car doesn't work, you take it to the mechanic to repair it. If you have a trauma, you go to a trauma therapist to repair it, etc., etc. There is no humanity there. There is no transformation. It's fixing a damage. Human beings are not machines that we need to fix their damage. Whatever happens to them has a transformative potential in that. And we need to, as therapeutically, engage with them in order to improve that. And according to this first language, vulnerability is rewarded. The more damaged you are, the more help you get. And people play that role, and sometimes we play it also as helpers. But also there is the transformational potentiality, which is seemingly incomprehensible, but restores human dignity and enables human transformation to radically review the fundamental existential questions. People, because they are so close to death, they come up with different ways of looking at themselves. And they are saying, now I see life in a new way. Now I see the sun and I value it. Now I value my connections with my family that I neglected them, etc., etc. In other words, there is what Jung has been telling us all the time. There is a teleological function there. We should not follow the trends of the society to look at it only in terms of causal reductive. We have Jung that in every writing of his warns us against the causal reductive limitations of our approaches. And yet when we come to the trauma situation, we just follow that. Where are the teleological transcendence of life? Jung didn't talk about teleological transcendence of life, but talk about teleology, and he talked about transcendence of life. And by transcendence of life, I mean, Jung says, I mean those experiences will reveal to the person the perpetual continuation of life through transformation and renewal. These situations include this potentiality. And ultimately, what we're here for is to develop a new epistemology, a new way of looking at things, not dictated by our pain and our causal reductive way of being limited, not dictated by the archetypal epistemology and all the archetypal scenario that are playing, that we're puppets of all the time, but a new individuated epistemology in order to redefine the way the problem was initially conceptualized. In other words, I wanted to stop the pain, but now I understand that it perhaps it can help me to open up different avenues in myself. I'm finishing. I'm finishing with a this is a photograph that I took in on a Greek island during some of the work that I was doing. Across here, you may see the shores of Turkey, and a boat just arrived of refugees from Turkey, from different parts of the world. They were very wet. The Red Cross provided them with dry clothes. They changed their clothes and then they left. And I was there and I just noticed this. I'm sure you know what this is. This is actually a makeup brush. I don't know what that is. I like that I don't know, because it helps me to abandon my ready-made theories that I have, the ready-made archetypal scenario of seeing these people as heroes or as victims or as this and that, and try to see the uniqueness of this human being. I don't know what this man or woman did with this makeup brush. Well, I like also the idea of transformation, because he was trying to transform himself or herself for a new life. And why he left it there, possibly for another friend who comes back or whatever. But I like that we don't know. And in order to know, we need to abandon the existing way of knowing and try to focus in the uniqueness in order to humanize the archetype and connect with that specific human being or specific situation in front of us, instead of us being puppets of archetypal scenario and them being puppets of archetypal scenario as well. Thank you very much. And I look forward to discussing things as much as we can today about what I presented. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Renos, and thank you, Larysa. Thank you for both your presentations that I'm full of images, feelings, and thoughts. And so I think it's a great invitation now for Q&A. We will have some time for that. And as Catherine said at the beginning, you can write your question or comment on the chat and make sure you indicate to whom it's directed. So and I think Catherine and Maxime will be helping us with the chat, right? But while you are warming up with the questions or comments, I will start making the first one. And I will see if I can put it clearly, because now I'm full of many thoughts at the same time. But I wanted to focus on this, because Larysa spoke of conscious and forced heroism, that at the same time that heroism, that heroic response that gets activated, and that we see it so much in these kind of situations. And you also, Reno, spoke about that archetypal activation, and that is epistemologic effect and archetypal effect. But I have two questions. One, if that activation of the kind of that heroic response or hero archetype, if you feel that it's a necessary step at some point, that if it remains for a long time, can become an obstacle to complexity. And I think this is one question for both. And the other one is, like, I think we are very full in our humanity of heroic narratives. And I was thinking if maybe it's a time for us as a collective to kind of make space for other kinds of narratives to help us to contain that suffering, And what do you think is maybe the place of the arts in that, or the function of the arts, the human relation, but also the arts? Also thinking about the video that we see at the beginning, and now the last picture. For me, when I saw your last picture, I thought that rush there, also like a piece of art someone could have created in there. So I have that thought also. So I thought I that those are my two questions to start.
You have questions there, and let me try to sort of yes, is the archetype of the hero necessary? It can be useful. It can be useful, but also let's not reduce all heroes to the archetype of the hero. There are acts of heroism, but there are acts of heroism by people who are driven by the hero archetype, and in a sense, they are doing it, because they are sort of, dictated by the archetype. But of course, there are heroes. There are heroes, and there are heroic acts. So, is it necessary? Maybe, but not necessary. Not necessary. Are the arts useful? Of course they're useful, because they can transmute, and then they can connect the personal with the collective in a way that it is personally meaningful. The whole thing is not to ignore that center there. If we stay out there, we're just puppets. We're just playing external scenario that have been pre-written for us. And we think that we're doing it ourselves, but actually we are, we're not, we're heroes in a story that was written by others. I'm sure there are other things, but I would like Larysa to have an opportunity to respond to that also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renos. And I agree with you. I'm just thinking about whether I know a lot of retired heroes. No, I don't know a lot of retired heroes, because heroes, this is something that is short-living. But if we could cope without that archetype, without its very powerful impact on us, no, I don't think so. Sometimes I think that this is the only thing that keeps us, may become an obstacle, and that's true. And I agree with you why I decided to focus on music and art. Art acts as history. It speaks about what's going on, combines suffering with love and beauty. This is the symbolic function of art, bringing that together and conveying that to next generations, because Russia is destroying not only physically, it destroys people, but also archives, KGB data, everything was destroyed or distorted. And arts, that's sometimes the only way to preserve and pass over this history, and also to cope and to overcome. That's so important for us now as a part of our being. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. And now I leave to Maxime and Catherine to bring the questions from the chat.
Hello, a question from Maria. How much time should pass and what kind of processes should happen so that two enemies meet and see something human in each other? And the question goes to Renos.
These are indescribable. In the American Civil War, we have an example where almost immediately after they felt the need to get together. But it depends on so many historical specificities. There, they wanted to start a new America. And in fact, I don't know how much you know about that history, but I mean, they took some of the generals of the defeated army to be generals of the United States. So they went into a narrative of reconciliation, and it was that. But with the Second World War, and not only that, these are the ones that are documented. I can tell you from my own experience in working in 40 different countries with wars and etc., that a lot of these things have been happening. I was part of several of them. I feel very privileged. I remember specifically in some work I did in El Salvador with government forces and rebels coming together several years after. Actually, the hostilities did not completely end. It depends on the situation. This is not prescribed. This is not prescribed. It depends on their own situation. But what I'm saying is that there is a need for human beings to humanize the enemy and not to see that they are just only baddies, but there are human beings like them that they are caught up either in politics or in archetypes or both, and they ended up destroying each other, and they have the need to restore their humanity. I'm talking, the emphasis is that. For me, the emphasis is on restoring the humanity.
Okay, there's a question here to Larysa. I wonder how you managed to work with these clients you describe that you see her as a heroine or victim. How do you work to reestablish the relatedness in the therapeutic room? That's to you, Larysa.
There is a space for all of that, but surprisingly, and this is what I wanted to emphasize in my presentation, as soon as we managed to restore, to come back to normal setting, it became possible for clients to place all of this content. It's like coming back home. As soon as setting is stabilized, the process starts going. And it was possible to place both victimized and heroic parts there. But I could see how it interfered, especially with clients abroad, the fact that I stayed back. For some, it was a helpful thing, but for some, it was an obstacle. But it was always a theme that we could reflect on and speak about. And actually, in transference, you never see what's not actually there. Even if externally the situation is terrible, anyway, this is about individual relationship, individual story, and object relationship. So, I mean, there is nothing alien there. It is always an individual story. But with transference, it is possible to speak about that somebody loved, somebody stayed, somebody is a returnee. That has always been interesting.
Thank you. Yes, there's a comment to everyone. There are potentially positive effects from going through collective adversity if there are enough resources for support and integration, collective holding, and possibly a certain level of consciousness. But realistically, collective adversity in the last century, including Ukraine, turned into intergenerational trauma. And I see the same scenario is likely to happen in Ukraine. When the experience of someone who has experienced trauma is not integrated, it not only perpetuates trauma in the unconscious ways, but also deprives close people, descendants of extremely valuable experience and resources for resilience for future tragedy. How to work with the intense energy of the archetype of destruction, suffering in general, but specifically of being destroyed by violent acts in ourselves and with clients. I guess that would be to both Larysa and Renos, if you have any thoughts about that. How to work with the intense energy of the archetype of destruction. It's not an easy question.
It's not an easy question. And just to carry on from what I was saying earlier, what I wanted to say about the individual situations in historical contexts, as you may know, in some countries in Europe, and actually in Holland, it's forbidden for Germans still to go because of what they did, who, not the same people, Germans did in Holland, not to the same people. And some other countries in Europe, I know, in Balkans, in Greece, in in Serbia, etc. Some places they say, if you are a German car, please don't go in because you may be attacked. In other words, that's where incredible atrocities were committed. So the idea of destruction is bigger than us. It's not just something that we contain. And some of that, that kind of destructiveness there continues. The question is, what can we contribute? What we can contribute is, in addition to the therapeutic situations that we are in, can we contribute something in terms of wider narratives? For example, some work that I did in Kosovo with some UN agencies was trying to create some soap operas after the war, where narratives of real human beings, families, etc., were experiencing conflict in relation to the war situations. By the way, even now, I mean, some of the work that I do at different levels, I work with mixed families or even Ukrainian families abroad, that one parent or is on this side or a child is on the other side, and they're asking for support to sort of heal that conflict. So we need to try to humanize conflict as much as possible and not to allow it. The moment we leave it only, and it does exist at the political level, the political level is not just simply collective and archetypal. We need to find ways of differentiating between those. Archetypal is different. It's blinding everybody. Politics are specific. You can argue, you can disagree, you can attack, you can, So there is a lot of conceptual and epistemological work that needs to be done there. Otherwise, we oversimplify the questions. And please, I'm not saying that this is an oversimplified question, but I mean, in ourselves, we have a tendency to oversimplify the questions, and ultimately there are no easy answers, and we should not run away from complexity.
Larysa, do you have any thoughts about this?
I have been thinking about how to comment, because how can we think about destruction where we are now facing the challenge of survival? We have to just survive by fighting back the destruction that comes from Russia, because we can reflect when we are past that, when symbols can arise. Now we are literally fighting back this destruction that is coming from every possible side. So noticing, yes, we try to think about that. We try to analyze Ukrainian therapists. We do try to introduce this thinking function and to preserve that. Clients who come, just ordinary people. But our objective now is to survive, to oppose this destruction, each at our own place. This would be my response.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I think we need to end the question and answer session there. Thank you.
So then I will thank you both again, because you have brought very, very interesting images, feelings, thoughts, reflections, and I think we have a lot to keep thinking and reflecting. And so now I will hand over to Claire, who is another member of the organizing and also a very hard worker for keeping all this together too, along with Catherine. So I don't know if Claire is somewhere there. I can't see her. Oh, no. Okay.
Thank you, Karen. We've heard of the importance of finding a home in brick and mortar, our own bodies, or more symbolically, a container, and of creating rituals in order to counter the effects of collective form of severe adversity. And at WUJ, we've endeavored to offer our Ukrainian colleagues a container, a symbolic home, where all of us could return monthly as a ritual. together as minds and bodies, by attending the webinars and caring for our Ukrainian colleagues, we show up as activists of the heart, which is a term coined by Brazilian analysts in a paper presented at the Analysis and Activism 2020 plus US Presidency Conference. All of you Ukrainian colleagues are activists of the heart as you continue working in such difficult conditions. All WUJ speakers are activists of the heart by giving their time freely, so that what would be the fee to attend their seminars can instead be donated on the GoFundMe fundraiser page. For the rest of us not directly involved in a war, donating money for each webinar we attend is another way to be activists of the heart. A very generous £3,800 were donated in the past month. A very heartfelt thank you to all who have donated. And here's one email from a Ukrainian colleague, one of many received testimonies. And I quote, "I would like to be on the list of recipients of financial assistance given the difficult times of the war. I remain living in and working in Kyiv with 2 children who continue to study. I am very much supported by the webinars organized by your team and those sincere words of support and deep thoughts of understanding the events and experience that we, Ukrainians, are going through. I feel protected. I feel very grateful to everyone." So if you haven't made a donation yet for this particular webinar, please do so by Thursday this week to our Ukrainian colleagues. It will be distributed to our Ukrainian colleagues who are suffering from severe financial hardship. And the distribution will happen soon before Christmas. And please click on the link, which is shared on the chat now, and you will be able to make a donation when the webinar has ended. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Karin, for your excellent sharing of this event and for sharing from your experience. I know life in Argentina is also tough at the moment. Inflation is running at nearly 150%, and the population, desperate for change, has now voted in a right-wing libertarian who wishes to downplay the crimes of the military dictatorship. There are no doubt difficult times ahead, so Karin, we wish you and your country well and hope President Milei will bring peace, stability and prosperity. A quick thank you also to the WJ team, especially Claire Mouchot, great to have her front of house for once, and Joseph Cox, and to all those who are working in one way or another on WJ. Thank you also to James and Neil from Sanctus Media. When Russia attempted its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February last year, our shock and outrage was profound. Many of us knew colleagues in Ukraine and were very distressed at the thought of what was happening to them. It called forth a special event, which included prominent analysts and academics, the president of the IAP, and colleagues from around the world. Professor Anne Ulanov, one of the great analysts of our times, gave an extraordinary presentation. Once again, we find ourselves in deeply disturbing times. In the Red Book, written at the time of the First World War, Jung writes about conflict. There is a passage where he has somehow managed to unite the opposites. He doesn't say how. And it is such a disaster that Satan has to be summoned to sort out the situation. We need conflict for individuation, for consciousness, and so that the new God image may emerge. Well, we have the conflict on a massive scale. What to do with it psychologically is now a question of immense significance. Fortunately, Anne Ulanov has agreed to present a sequel to her paper. The title of her new paper is Speaking to the Unspeakable. Speaking to the Unspeakable. Once again, it will draw on Jung's Red and Black books. After our first webinar, Anne told us that the paper had been the most difficult she had ever written. From time to time, I hear from her about the process of writing this follow-on paper, and I know she is once again descending to the depths and suffering it in the hope of bringing something of value forth for us. So our next webinar will be on the 12th of December. It will be a special webinar in response to the ongoing war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. Underlining the significance of the event, we are pleased that the president of the IAP will once again be giving a short address. The format will be slightly different and it will be a little shorter, but we will still have our customary 1-minute silence and definitely the prayer for Ukraine. So we invite you to come and join us to support our colleagues who are caught up in the war and yourselves to be nourished by Anne's presentation as we are all confronted by current events. But for now, the time has come to say goodbye to our Ukrainian, Israeli and Palestinian colleagues and all those at risk. We pray that you, your families and your communities stay safe. To Larysa and all those with family living under Russian military occupation, we look forward to the day when they will once again be free, and when you can, Larysa, if you wish, return home. Today, Ukraine celebrates the Day of Dignity and Freedom. It is a public holiday established in honor of the beginning of two revolutions, the Revolution of 2004 and the Revolution of Dignity in 2013. 10 years ago, young Ukrainians began protesting for a more European orientation for their country. When they were beaten by security forces, mass protests took place. Russian television characterized the protesters as fascists and gays, and Putin prepared to invade. Well, Ukraine did not collapse when it was invaded the following year, nor during the full-scale invasion last year. Putin underestimated Ukraine's capacity to believe in themselves, in their ideals, and their capacity to organize themselves to resist. So we invite you to stay a couple of minutes more and to join with us as James plays Lysenko's Prayer for Ukraine. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.